One. Hey guys, it's Jenny and Mimi, founders of the naughtynutritionist.com, where we're all about teaching you easy tips and strategies on how to lose weight and reach your health goals without giving up on all the good stuff in life. So we just started a series.
Sorry. Sorry, guys.
That's all right. Yeah. Let me make sure I'm okay too.
Yeah.
This is our first ever diet talk, and we're going to get a little chatty here with some wine. I don't know, Jenny has the chocolate. I don't have the chocolate yet.
I have the chocolate. I have some brownies.
Okay. And I've gone with white wine today, which is not my go-to usually, but I'm just feeling that today started to be a bit colder. I was out, I was seeing all pumpkin spice everything in the coffee shops, and I'm like, oops, it's getting like to winter, so I'm just gonna go ahead and enjoy some white wine while we talk about some of the most popular fat diets, and this is something we love talking about. So let's get started.
Yeah, so first on the docket this week is probably the most popular diet out there. And it's a diet that keeps changing its branding and its packaging. Like you can think back to Atkins when that was all of everything. And now you have the paleo, keto, gluten-free, sugar-free, everything. Like this is popping up, and it's all kind of surrounded around the low carb diet. Low carb, low sugar. And you know, some of these diets like paleo, keto, sugar-free, gluten-free, they can be very beneficial. And we're not putting them down. But what we are here to discuss today is low carb to no carb specifically as a popular weight loss method. And we will say it that if you go low carb and if you go carb free or very, very, very limited amount of carbs, you will lose weight. And you will probably lose a rapid amount of weight loss. Like it will be fast. You will notice it very fast. But the thing about it, and the thing about every single diet that you're on, or every single way to lose weight or eating method, is that you have to ask yourself questions such as, does it work long term? Is it sustainable? Will you gain the weight back? Does it teach you about nutrition? Or does it just tell you to eat this and don't eat that? And does it restrict so many foods that you feel deprived of them? So a lot of questions you have to ask every time you want to lose weight. If your diet's not saying to you, eat this, don't eat that, but not telling you why, then that's a big red flag. So like we said, there are specific diets out there like paleo, keto, these things that can be beneficial for some people, but we are here to debunk the low carb diet. So here are our top points and what we wanted to discuss today. Yeah.
So the reasons, these are the top points I think that we're going to talk about of why this doesn't work long-term, and especially for weight loss. And I think you mentioned something very important, is that these diets, some people may do very well on them, but if you're going to go so extreme, to go so low carb, you have to do it with a qualified practitioner. So you have to have somebody monitoring you and not go online and just search for whatever diet you find and you hear that somebody lost weight and you go on it, because it can turn dangerous, especially with the low carb diet. So carbs are a major macronutrient. So even though they've been shamed quite a bit, and especially in the past couple of years, they are needed for us to survive. So your body naturally prefers to burn carbs for energy. So your brain, the main source of fuel for your brain for you to be able to function, is having a certain amount of carbohydrates. And it's also needed for muscle repair, especially if you're somebody that likes to exercise. You need it for your pre-workout and post-workout. If you're not getting enough carbs, one of the first things you're going to notice is you might notice this brain, like a brain fog. You might not be able to function optimally. So that's, I think, one of the first main things on why carbs are needed for your body to survive.
Yeah, so true. I've run into a lot of people on low carb, no carb diets, and I always say, how do you feel? And usually the response is headaches, fatigue, and like that's not necessarily a great thing. You should, when you're losing weight, you should start to feel more energy and start to feel really good, as opposed to feeling really drained and in pain. So that's a huge point. And number two, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to mention something on that. And I think it's because people do it too fast. So they would probably be eating all the sugar and all these carb heavy foods. Maybe they are eating too much carbs and suddenly they would just cut it out completely.
Yeah.
And so I think that's when you get
detox,
so many of these side effects.
Yeah, so number two, our second point on the low carb diet is that when you lose weight with carb restriction, most of the fast initial weight loss is water weight. And then when you stop it, when you start eating the carbs again, you might gain the weight back just as fast. So really fun fact, unused carbs are stored in the body, in the muscles and liver as glycogen. So we have a little sheet right here of some facts about how the body stores carbohydrates, just for your information. So carbohydrates are stored as glycogen in the muscles and liver, along with 3 times its own weight in water. So think about that. So you have a gram of glycogen, you're getting 3 grams of water weight. So that's 4 grams in total, and 75% of that is water. And now when you're on a low carb diet and you stop eating all the carbs and then you start losing weight, what you're gonna end up doing is losing the glycogen along with that water weight. So you're losing the water weight really fast. And that's why these low carb diets tend to make people lose quite a lot of weight in the first few days. It's because of water weight. So that's a huge fact and a huge point that we really want to touch base on, because most people don't know that. And they wonder why they're gaining the weight back so fast when they start eating carbs again. It's because it's water.
Yeah, that's why it's so popular as a short-term as well as a short-term weight loss solution, but it's like fake weight loss in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
And you might even be losing, as I was saying, it's so important for your muscles, you might even be losing muscle mass along with that eventually if you stay on it for too long. Yeah. So the third point we wanted to get to with why we don't like carb diets is because once you go on a low carb diet and you're used to, most of us are used to eating certain amount of carbs. And if you were very carb heavy, you were eating a lot of muffins, maybe donuts, a lot of sugar heavy foods, you're gonna get extreme cravings and you're gonna hold off on them on day 1 and day 2 and day 3 and day 4. And at some point you're gonna just break and you're gonna probably fulfill this need to have those carbs with a lot of simple sugar. So you're gonna go back and you're gonna eat whatever donuts and muffins and everything. You're gonna get back your stores and probably you're gonna go on the diet again. So it's putting you in that cycle, and eventually you're gonna be gaining, so you're gonna be losing weight and probably gaining more weight than you initially lost.
Yeah. And with that, it doesn't teach you about the difference. And this is going back to nutrition information. It doesn't teach you about the difference between simple or quick release carbs and slow release carbs or slow release sugars, complex carbs. So we'll just make it easier and say simple sugars or complex carbs. And these are two completely different, they're carbs, but they're two different things that work in your body. So for example, you have white sugar, or even, you could even say honey or maple syrup. These are still simple sugars because your body uses them very fast. And then you have your complex carbs like sweet potatoes and whole grains, and your body uses them very slow. So we have another little fun fact sheet here. Not all carbs are created equal. So it's tempting to think that simple carbs, due to their smaller molecular size, are absorbed more quickly than complex carbs and produce a large and rapid rise in blood sugar. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. For example, apples containing simple carbs produce a small and prolonged rise in blood sugars despite being high in simple carbs. A lot of simple carbs, complex carbs, it can be very confusing.
Lots of complicated.
Yes. So many starchy foods or complex carbs, such as potatoes and bread, are digested and absorbed very quickly and have a rapid rise in blood sugars. So everything that you eat that contains carbohydrates or sugar reacts differently in your body than the other food that you had that contains carbohydrates or sugar. So when you pick a low carb, no carb diet, and it's not explaining that to you, then this is a huge red flag, because how do you know? How do you know that, you know, your potatoes might cause a spike in blood sugars and you might need to balance it out with protein and fiber in order to level out your blood sugars and not create that spike? So it's just, that's just a big point for us as well, is learning about simple sugars and complex or slow release sugars.
A quick fun fact about potatoes, since I like potatoes, I'm not giving them up. But usually having them with the skin makes them a bit of a better, more slow absorbed carbs. So once you have them with the skin, because the skin has a lot of nutrients and additional fiber, so it makes it more slow release. So that's one tip for cooking potatoes.
I didn't even know that.
And they taste better.
Yeah, I like skinned potatoes. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So the fifth point on carbs, and we want to keep it short for you today. These are really the main points on carbohydrates, is that carbs are one of the main food sources for fiber. So once you start cutting out carbs, and a lot of diets, when they cut out carbs, they're even cutting out fruits. So they even cut out apples and bananas, and even some allow some amount of berries because they're lower, they have a lower sugar content, but even that, some cut out fruits completely, and you probably don't want to be doing that, because carbs and whole grains and beans and lentils and all of these, like oats and the quinoas and all the grains and pseudo grains and everything in that category, really is one of our main sources of fiber. We do have our vegetables as well, of course, but we eat, I think we eat a much bigger chunk of probably the grains and the oats and the beans and the lentils than we do with vegetables. So they are a main source of fiber, as well as they have a resistant starch, which acts as a fuel for the gut bacteria. So all your gut bugs, they eat this fiber, and it's like good food for them, and that allows all the good bacteria in your gut to thrive. And there's another name for this, and it's they act as prebiotics, so the food for your healthy gut bacteria. So with that point, another thing I think people notice when they go very low carb is constipation, and that's because you're cutting out a lot of the fibers. So that's another thing we don't like about low fiber diet, because having probably shouldn't be talking about poop while we're having our
we're
wine in the evening, but having a healthy poop is very important because you have a lot of things that are released, like all these toxins, any bad stuff that shouldn't be in there. That's how it comes out. So it's really important.
Yeah.
So with that, our whole take on it all is that eliminating any food group, whether it's carbs, whether it's fats, whether it's protein, and I think we're going to be talking about that in the coming weeks, is just going to result in you losing weight for the short term. You're probably not going to be in a better state of health, and you're definitely, like for most people, this is not sustainable. It's not how we want to live our lives on these diets. So one of our first tips is start cutting out the simple sugars that Jenny was talking about, because they're bigger contributors to weight gain than all carbs. So this is all your white flours, your white rice, your white sugar, and that doesn't mean that you're never going to have them. So I often, when I go out for Asian food, I love jasmine rice, and most of what's served outside is white rice, and that is okay. I mean, if you're having it in a curry with some coconut, like a coconut curry, which has the fats, it's still going to be more slowly absorbed than if you're having it on its own. Yeah. But overall, like, cut out those foods. And another thing is, if you do have issues, then you can look for sprouting or fermenting, and this helps with digestibility, so you won't be as bloated. And most people don't have issues with grains, so if you do have issues with grains, then perhaps you can look into different ways of incorporating them.
Yeah. So I have issues with grains. I'll just go briefly on this. I have issues with a lot of grains, white rice being one of them. But I don't have issues with sprouted, like sourdough bread, sprouted grains. I even have issues with quinoa from time to time. I can eat in small amounts. But how I've come to figure it out was keeping a diary on when I find that I'm getting more crampy after eating, and then I can pinpoint. So that's another thing that you can do if you're like, oh, I need to cut out all grains because it's going to make me bloated. That's probably not true. It's probably that they're specific things. Always start with white flour, white bread, white pasta. I mean, most people, if they feel like they're bloated after a big bowl of pasta, it's probably because it's the white flour rather than having a bowl of whole grain pasta, which you also don't need to eat as much whole grain pasta because you get full much quicker, right? So that being said, just trying to be mindful of what you're eating. We did touch briefly on every food reacts differently within your body, whether it's simple or complex carb. So the best piece of advice is the cutting out simple sugars, but also going for complex carbs in place of the simple sugar. So instead of having a white bread, have the whole grain or the sprouted or the fermented. Instead of having white pasta, you have your spelt, your kamut. You could even get quinoa or brown rice pasta. Yeah, and then add a ton of veggies into your diet, because veggies are amazing and they're so good for you, and they're awesome. So don't really think too much about the whole simple sugar versus complex sugar. Think more of, is it a whole food? Is it a whole grain? Is it a whole vegetable? Is it a whole food? Because then it's better to have the whole food rather than to have a incredibly processed food. So yeah.
And balance is key. So again, you don't have to have oats for breakfast, sandwich for lunch, and a pizza for dinner. What you need to do is vary it out. So if you had grains for breakfast or lunch, then you can have more green veggies or like broccolis, cauliflowers, any like those veggies for dinner. So that's our take on the low carb diet. Thank you guys for joining us. We hope to see you next week. We have a great freebie that we're gonna post above this video, and it's the 10 naughty secrets to never diet again, because we hate diets, and we're gonna continue telling you about them for the next few weeks.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us, and have an amazing evening. Cheers.
Bye guys. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.